Initial Thoughts is a spoiler-free movie review series. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to Initial Thoughts, a series in which we talk about films as and when they're released. Today's film we're talking about is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, which is directed of course by Sam Raimi and stars Benedict Cumberbatch and Elizabeth Olsen. So here we are again, talking about yet another Marvel entry. These ones, the Marvel films as a whole seem to come so quick and fast, because before we can even let Spider-Man No Way Home breathe, we're into essentially its sequel in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And Multiverse of Madness is a film that has been hyped and hyped and hyped, and certainly with trailers and the potential of what could be in this film has a lot of fans, including myself, speculating on not only what's in this film, but what it builds to the future of the MCU, which I feel that we talk about quite a lot nowadays. You know, after Endgame, every film seems to be building for the future of what the MCU is, and it has to be, you know, leading to a big bad, or who's going to be our next set of Avengers, or, you know, all these kind of questions that we've all asked ourselves now that the core original group has disbanded and is not going to be continuing, certainly, for what it was, you know, with people like Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans completely away from the project now, and it's who's going to step up into their shoes. And I know for a lot of people, the thought that would have been Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, and certainly you would definitely make the argument, it's hard to argue, that Doctor Strange as a character is certainly at the forefront of Marvel, certainly at the movie side of things at the moment. But with Benedict Cumberbatch only having one actual signature outing as the character in Doctor Strange, its own film, not these kind of bit part roles in the larger overall scale in things like Infinity War and Endgame, where his character and his performances are very interesting and are genuinely good in them. In the Doctor Strange film originally, which feels like a million years ago at this point, with there being so many films released in between, I find that Doctor Strange itself as a film was just okay. I didn't hate it. I thought it was certainly one of the better films, but it certainly probably falls on the line of middle of the road for Marvel films in quality. So when I heard that there was a sequel being made for Doctor Strange, but then it was going to have Wanda, played by Elizabeth Olsen, who has certainly grown to be maybe the most interesting character, certainly one of the best actresses or even actors in all of the MCU at this point. She really has some quality, and she showed that so much in the WandaVision series, which is something that the WandaVision series I quite enjoyed for what it was. I found that while it certainly strung out the tension, and there was certainly a little bit of filler, certainly towards the middle of the series, I did find that it was definitely up there with the best of the Disney Plus MCU shows. So watching that, and watching obviously Doctor Strange's story so far, coming into this, there was certainly a lot of prior knowledge from my part on both the, say, core characters of this in Benedict Cumberbatch and Elizabeth Olsen as Doctor Strange and Wanda Maximoff. And then you add into the mix the multiverse idea, this fact that any kind of character, any kind of situation can be brought in, and there really is a way for Marvel to explore all these different iterations of their characters. You know, obviously what happened in No Way Home, previous generations of the Spider-Man appearing, previous villains, etc. It really opens the door for this kind of anything is possible idea. So going into Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, I don't think anyone would have been able to correctly predict beat by beat what was going to happen in this film. There was certainly a lot of it coming in. I mean, before we went in, myself and a few mates, who we had a chat about just kind of what we were predicting to be in this film, and we were all quite varied in what we thought was going to be in here. We certainly speculated a lot of different characters, a lot of these rumours that have circulated online. So there certainly was that build-up going in, and that was certainly part of the experience going into Doctor Strange. But my biggest problem, I think, and not the film itself, but my biggest problem with myself and kind of all of us going into this as fans of the character and as fans of the possibilities of what could happen in this film, the worry was for me is there's so much fan service that there isn't a worthwhile tale being told, because that was something that I tried to reiterate and certainly emphasize when I spoke about Spider-Man No Way Home. Not only does it have the, oh my god, they're in it, oh my god, this, it certainly has that, of course it does. But what it also has is one of the best character stories in the MCU of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. And that was something that was so important, because not only was it the, you know, as I say, the spectacle of, oh my god, look at that, I never thought I'd ever see that. Yes, there's that in abundance in that film. But a really tight-knit, well-written story there. And that leads me into this film wonderfully. So let's talk about, first of all, what I really, really loved in this film. And I want to start in no other spot. And you would think I would start with the lead actor that is Benedict Cumberbatch in Doctor Strange. But I'm going to actually talk about his counterpart first. Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda Maximoff. I mentioned slightly earlier about her performance in WandaVision. And this kind of... She is so powerful, but her conveyance of grief throughout kind of all of her Marvel tenure, when she appeared in Age of Ultron, and kind of through that her story has been a sad one. So there certainly is the empathy, and Elizabeth Olsen really has some wonderful acting chops, and they are put to amazing effect in this film. Her performance in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness might be her best yet in MCU, and probably, well, I would say yes, her best I've seen her in anything, because admittedly I haven't really seen her in anything bar the MCU at this point. So for her to be given a performance like this in her kind of co-lead role, if you like, in this film, wonderful performance from her. I was blown away from her performance. Her conveyance, I said already, her conveyance of grief in these moments, her facial acting, you know, the way she is able to portray her emotions through her eyes, through her subtle movements. It is not just a, you know, I am annoyed. It is not as cut and dry as that. It's a lot more subtler, and I can't commend Elizabeth Olsen on her performance enough. Absolutely wonderful. And let's talk about Benedict Cumberbatch. Benedict Cumberbatch is an actor that I certainly love. I've spoke about him a good lot of times on the channel now, and he is someone that I certainly think has a good lot of wonder performances in him. But sadly, I found him slightly underwhelming in this film. I thought with him being in the lead role, I actually found his performance as Doctor Strange in the first film, a good lot of years back, Doctor Strange itself, I found him a lot more interesting then. I thought him a lot more engaging as well, I suppose is probably the word. I found a real... There was that... Elizabeth Olsen's performance bursts off the screen, whereas Benedict Cumberbatch, I felt kind of the opposite. I felt that he was holding a lot back, to be honest. And I know certainly that leads into a bit of the character that he's playing, I suppose, and he's kind of supposed to be a little bit emotionless, and, you know, again, the kind of the opposite of what Scarlet Witch or Wanda Maximoff is in this story. Doctor Strange is supposed to be the opposite, and it is these kind of... The way they bounce off each other through the film, that was kind of the core part of this. But I do have to say, I was slightly underwhelmed by Benedict Cumberbatch in this. Not him particularly, but I just felt that his character wasn't really given... While he is certainly at the core of the film, as you would imagine, he is not, as I've heard some people say, they had hoped he wasn't a bit part player in his own film. That's not the case. He is certainly front and centre, and he's not awful by any means. The character, it's not Benedict Cumberbatch's performance, I suppose. It's more how Doctor Strange is written in this film. I didn't really, you know, in something like a Captain America or something like a Thor, you know, I find their characters are written to a way where you're very much on board with them. I don't think there was a part where I, as an audience member, was fully rooting for Doctor Strange throughout this film, and I suppose that was maybe a choice, maybe that was written into the story. I suppose that was maybe part of it in some ways, and some plot narratives kind of led to that. But that was just my personal feeling on that. But and a few other things I absolutely loved. I mean, let's talk about Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi as a director, you know, he's done it all when it comes to, you know, these big blockbusters. He's done the superhero, you know, obviously the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man's obviously well documented, especially with Spider-Man 2, what he was able to achieve in that superhero film. So there was a lot given to Sam, and you can imagine that when he had the meetings with Kevin Feige and all the folks at Marvel, and they had the chat about, we want to make a darker kind of Doctor Strange story with a good lot of horror elements. what I would say is, for any Sam Raimi fans out there, and I certainly would class myself as one of them, I think Evil Dead is, Evil Dead is iconic for a reason. Sam Raimi was given a lot of free rein in this film. And what I mean by that is, he was allowed to implement a lot of horror elements to this film, which I was quite surprised about, to be honest, because you would imagine with Marvel films certainly have that tag as being kids' films. And certainly a lot of them have explored certainly darker elements or more adult themes. But there was a few scenes in this film that were genuine, something like out of It, Pennywise, and there was that kind of scenario, and I found myself very surprised that they went and they allowed him this much free rein, but that was something I absolutely loved. I thought fair play to the folks at Marvel, because if they were, playing their cards just close to their chest and they were not kind of letting him do his vision, and they say, no, you're not doing this, blah blah blah, that was something that I really did enjoy. And lastly, something I did absolutely love, and something that kind of, I think I mentioned this in a few of the other ones, a few of Marvel films we chatted about previously. The special effects at this point are on another level. Some of the special effects, some of the scenes, some of the multiverse breaking scenes in this film, they're what a 4K Blu-ray player is made for. a 4K or a Blu-ray player, they really can harness this. But seeing this on the big screen, it's a spectacle. Some of these scenes are a feast for the eyes, let's say. So that was something that definitely I loved, and there was a good lot that I really did enjoy in this film. So now that we've got the good stuff out of the way, let's talk inevitably, as you would have guessed, I was leading to as I talked along there, about the stuff I didn't particularly like. And you will notice that whenever I talked about all the things that I thought were wonderful or good or loved throughout the film, I omitted the story, the plot line, the character beats, and that is my biggest gripe with this film. From nearly the minute go to, and it gets more and more incoherent as the film goes. I know in the title it's Multiverse of Madness, and yes, there's the element of madness, so anything could happen. But at the main part of this story, you've got the problem, you've got the fix of the problem, and that's the story beats. But where this story goes to achieve these beats, once you get into it, once you get about 45-50 minutes into this film, you have a good idea, let's say, of how this is going to plan out in the end. You've got an idea of how the closing act will end up inevitably finishing. You genuinely get the gist, or if not exact, you have a genuine idea. But how it gets there, and don't get me wrong, all films have that. All films, probably about halfway through, you can kind of guess that maybe one or two options of how they could end the film. That's not really unique in this scenario. But I find this film tries to say a lot. But in doing so, it says very little. Because it'll start to go down one kind of plot narrative, and before it's even got that one even slightly developed, let's pull that back and let's start going down different. And before we get down this next plot narrative, no, let's come back and let's start something else. And it feels that, and this was something that I can't get out of my head. If you took someone who is not into Marvel, and I imagine some of you guys are not big Marvel fans, not everybody loves Marvel, and I get that. And don't get me wrong, I don't love all Marvel myself. There's a lot of them I'm very, very emotionally attached to. Things like Spider-Man No Way Home and Infinity War, things like Logan, even the Deadpool series. There's a lot of Marvel that I find I really, truly love. But there's a lot. I chatted about this a lot actually last year when I spoke about the Eternals film, and I had this kind of 20-minute rant on the kind of Marvel overall picture. But something, and going back to what I was saying there, something I couldn't get out of my head when I was watching this film, certainly when it got into kind of its closing act. I remember a while back I went with my father to see Captain America Civil War, and he had only ever seen one other Marvel film before that, and it was actually the first Iron Man in 2008. So I remember taking him to see that. And I remember watching it with him, and obviously it was me seeing it for the first time myself, but halfway, or kind of part way into the film, I was thinking, I wonder how much my dad is connecting with the film. Does he get the beats? Is he able to understand, at least on a primal level, or kind of the baseline level, if you like, where each character, what has led them to get to this point, their different dynamics with each other, and there's a story to hang on to there. And I asked him after the film, I said, I know a lot of that wouldn't have made much sense to you, but were you able to keep along with the story? Did you enjoy it? And he said, you know what, for what it was, and he's not big into superhero films at all himself, but he said for what it was, you know, he was able to understand, because the plot narrative was pretty good. You know, obviously in Civil War, you've got basically it's two sides of a coin. You've got Captain America, you've got Iron Man, and they're both going head to head over kind of the same agreement that's been handed to them, and they're just coming at it with different points of view, and that's it. It on a very baseline level, it's a simple film, but it's the narrative, the story, the charisma of the characters is what really drives that film along. And there was enough for my dad to say, or just in this example, any Marvel fan, or sorry, non-Marvel fan going to a Marvel film can come in and go, okay, I can latch on to this part, for example, or I have enough here to grasp and build with it, and then they can make their own opinion if they want to continue watching Marvel films. This film is completely, I find it the opposite. I find this film was, if you had to come into this with an unbelievable amount of prior knowledge of all of these characters, and don't get me wrong, there's not too many characters to know a lot of, but if you didn't come into this seeing the first Doctor Strange, Infinity War, Endgame, WandaVision, Spider-Man No Way Home, there's probably others, I can't even think to the top of my head, but already there's 5 different kind of prerequisites that you need to have the knowledge of to really build any kind of attachment from a base level to either Doctor Strange or Wanda Maximoff, or both in this film. And I just think we're going too far down the rabbit hole here as Marvel fans. Where is the entry point for the normal cinema goer? That's something that I really, I think if it's done well, because even, and I go with it, I keep referring back to it because it's our most recent one prior to this, Spider-Man No Way Home. I imagine if someone came into that, and you've got the start of the film where obviously he's being hunted because you know the plot beat at the start of the film, you know what happens and why he's being chased and etc, etc. But kind of from the first 20 to 25 minutes, I imagine the normal cinema goer would go, you know, someone that hadn't really been following, maybe had only seen the odd other Marvel film, if they watched that, they'd be able to latch on to what's happening. And yes, I'm not saying that there's absolutely nothing to cling on to in this film, but there's not a lot. And I feel that Sam Raimi with Spider-Man 2, for example, certainly his crowning superhero achievement, you would say. Certainly one of the better superhero films that has been made in the last kind of 20 years. You know, as in a case of just start to finish and not being connected into any kind of bigger storyline. I just don't know. I don't know. As I say, I loved a lot of the horror elements he was allowed to implement. I loved a lot of the performances, but I just feel that this film, it didn't do it for me. It really didn't. And I'm sure you're wondering what I thought of the fan service that I mentioned earlier. And there was a lot. For what it is, there's a lot of fan service. There's a lot of not even just fan service, but actually quite intriguing characters and intriguing plot elements that they kind of explore. And this leads back to my overall point. They go down these different plot narratives. They start to explain, they start to kind of build on what they've set, and then they bring it back again. They take it away from that. And as an audience, as an audience member, for myself, just overall, I find myself wanting more. And I think that's the overall thought in the film. I could continue to go down different. But you know, to give an example, if I was talking about this film, and I started talking about, say when I was chatting at the start there, and I was talking about Elizabeth Olsen, if I started going, Elizabeth Olsen is really, really good, but and then there was this other thing with Benedict Cumberbatch, like that's me diverting. You want me to stick on the point. You want me to talk about that part. I want the story to focus on the part it starts to explore. That was the part, and that was the kind of overall thought for this film, I have to admit I'm a bit let down. A bit let down. I really expected, I think, just more of a coherent story. More of a coherent story, and this film is a good time. A good time. And yes, I don't want to be too negative, because there is a lot, and that's why I started with a lot of the stuff I did love. And don't get me wrong, I did love Elizabeth Olsen's performance is masterful at times. She's so good in this, similar in the way she was in WandaVision. She really knocks it out of the park. The special effects, the horror scenes, Sam Raimi, just, that is the creme de la creme. His kind of horror specialism that he has, oh, that is chef's kiss, beautiful. It's just the overall story, and that's my negative. I hope and pray that you guys love this more than I did. I hope that you find a lot more enjoyment than I did out of Doctor Strange. But for me personally, it didn't tick the boxes like a lot of Marvel films have, and that's a shame. That's a shame. I expected more. I hoped for more, and I didn't really get what I wanted, which is a shame. But you know, as a Marvel fan and someone who's been along for the ride and has seen nearly everything that Marvel has put out in this MCU iteration, you can't win them all. You can't win them all. They're not going to be Infinity Wars or Guardians of the Galaxies or Spider-Man No Way Home. They're not all going to be at that level, and I understand that. And again, I mentioned that when I talked about Eternals last year. There's some real great ones. There's some ones that really resonate with me. Thor, upcoming later this year, I have real high hopes for. But for this film, I was let down. Let down. Really on the plot, not on the any of the stuff I mentioned that I really loved. Just the story. Just the story. There wasn't enough to latch on to here as a Marvel fan or a non-Marvel fan, and I think that's the biggest cardinal sin this film commits. And I think it's just as simple as that. So let's get to rating time. As you can see, IMDb has been very kind in the early indications, you know, being close to an 8, you know, there's 7.7. That's high praise. People seem to have loved this a lot more than I have. And certainly that is only early indications. That could change over time when a lot more people see this and the kind of mass opinion forms of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But for me, it's certainly not getting that high of a score for me. I debated with a performance giving this a 7. And Elizabeth Olsen's performance was that good, I nearly bumped it up to that. But for me, a story being told in a film is the most important part. Forget the performances, forget the special effects, forget the horror scenes, you know, the stuff that I've already mentioned I loved. The most important part is a worthwhile story being told. And I didn't get that, so I can't give it a really resounding score. But because of the things I loved, I'm not giving it too degrading of a score either. This film, for me, Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness, is getting a 6.5 out of 10. I had hoped that I had hoped, to be honest with you, I would be talking, you know, the 8s for this film. I really did. But, no, not for me. Not for me. Again, I hope you love it, but for me, it didn't tick the boxes that I hoped it would. So that's been my thoughts on Doctor Strange the Multiverse of Madness. I hope you enjoy it more than I did. If you have enjoyed listening to me talking about films and you want to listen to me more, a subscription would be absolutely beautiful. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to me talking about movies, as always. And if you're excited for, you know, what, there's a good lot coming. There's a good lot of films. We're getting into movie season now, which is certainly exciting. Even before Doctor Strange, we got a lot of trailers, a lot of films coming up in May, June, into the summer period. It's going to be a busy time. A lot of initial thought videos, I can imagine, will be out in the coming weeks and months. So certainly a busy time. If you want to stick around for that, I'd appreciate you so much for that. And as always, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye, guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.